Have you ever believed that sometimes the one knocking at your door isn't danger, but a chance to do what's right? In the early 1990s, deep in the misty forests of North Carolina, a reclusive nurse named Miriam Cole, grieving the loss of her only son, heard a soft, rhythmic knock on her cabin porch. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something no one would ever expect. A baby Bigfoot, no taller than her waist, with deep, pleading eyes, beckoning her into the woods. This is not folklore. This is the real, untold story of a woman who followed a mythical creature into the heart of the forest and discovered something far more human than she could ever imagine. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover why Bigfoot sought help from a human instead of hiding, what sacred gift they gave her in return, and how a broken heart met healing in the most unexpected way. So before we begin, I want to ask you, dear listener, where in the world are you watching from? What's your name? Because I truly believe this story can reach places we've never imagined. And perhaps someone out there needs to hear it today. From my heart to yours, thank you for being here. If you believe in kindness beyond species and in the quiet magic of the world, leave a like, subscribe, and join our growing community of Bigfoot believers. Let's make sure this story finds its way home. The wind hadn't quite shaken off the sleep of summer. It moved gently through the thinning canopy, carrying that crisp edge that only autumn knew how to bring. In the golden hush of morning, the cabin stood like a held breath among the trees, its paint faded, its roof sagging slightly, and the porch creaked even without weight. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to prove itself, just existed. Miriam sat with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since stopped steaming. She didn't seem to mind. Her eyes drifted past the rim, past the window glass, out into the sea of red and amber maples. There was a slowness to her movement, not from age, though age had certainly earned its place in her body, but from the kind of grief that teaches you how to be quiet in your bones. Beside her, on the table, was a small wooden box. It was no longer locked, no longer hidden away. The lid lay open. Inside, carefully wrapped in a pale handkerchief stitched with the name Eli, were a few pieces of a boy's life. A scratched-up toy truck missing its front wheel, a crumpled sketch of a forest creature drawn in pencil, and the corner of a hospital ID bracelet that time had yellowed. Miriam didn't cry anymore. Not like before. Grief had calcified, become part of the landscape, like the moss that crept up the cabin's foundation, always there, always green, always damp. Then came the knock. Not sharp, not rushed, not the kind of sound you'd expect from someone desperate or lost. No, it was steady, deliberate, a rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. She didn't move at first. The kind of woman who had lived alone in the forest for years didn't spook easily. But this wasn't right. Too methodical to be wind, too calm to be animal. It was a knock made by something with a sense of order. She placed her mug down, slow, careful not to let it clink against the wood. Her eyes narrowed just slightly as she reached for the curtain beside the door. Through the small slit in the fabric, she saw it. Something low to the ground, hunched perhaps, but upright. Covered in fur the color of wet tree bark, broad shoulders, arms too long for any child. It stood at the edge of the porch, just out of full view, but close enough for her to see a glint of reflection in the eyes. Her heart didn't race. It thudded, deep, a reminder she was still alive. It wasn't a bear. The posture was wrong. It wasn't a wolf. The mass, the stance, wrong again. And it wasn't a man. Not unless some man had grown himself a coat of fur and shrunk 2 feet. But what struck her wasn't fear. It was shape, the height, the tilt of the shoulders. The way the creature's head moved slightly to the side, like it was waiting for permission. It was the height of a boy, her boy. A crack opened inside her, a place she had sealed. She drew a breath and unlatched the door. It groaned inward on its hinges. She didn't step out, didn't speak, just looked. There it stood, a childlike creature covered in dark brown fur, thick but patchy in places like it hadn't grown into its skin. Its arms hung loosely, its hands, yes, hands, not paws, clutched the edge of the porch rail. Its eyes, enormous and wet, blinked once, twice, black and liquid and knowing. It didn't growl, didn't run, just looked back. It was a silence neither of them broke. Then, as gently as the rain tapping on pine needles, the creature raised a hand and knocked once again on the wooden post, then pointed, out toward the trees, toward something deeper. Its brow furrowed, not in anger, but something more urgent, worried. Miriam opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came. The creature didn't wait. It took a step back, eyes still on her, then turned and began to move toward the tree line. She should have closed the door, should have locked it, pulled the bolt across and waited for morning to swallow the strange event whole. Instead, she stood still. The air inside her chest vibrated with that same tight ache she remembered when Eli would wake from nightmares, how his small voice would tremble, asking her not to leave the room just yet. And those eyes, the creature had his eyes. She grabbed the canvas bag from the hook, the one with the emergency medical kit, the same one she hadn't used in years. Her hands moved fast, muscle memory from days when every second mattered. Gauze, bandages, scissors, antiseptic. She locked the cabin door behind her. For a moment, she looked back, at the porch where the knock had sounded, at the window still catching the morning light, at the box left open on the table. Then she followed. The creature moved quickly. It didn't travel on paths. There were no trails, no human tracks, just thick brush and earth softened by years of untouched time. Miriam had to push through fern and bramble, her boots slipping more than once against slick roots and uneven ground. Branches scratched her coat. A low-hanging limb caught in her hair. She didn't care. She kept up, her breath short, the cold cutting into her throat. She was too old for this, but she kept going. There were signs. Small things she began to notice the deeper they went. Scratches high up on tree trunks, far too tall for any common animal. Rocks stacked deliberately, not carelessly, forming crude arrows or boundary markers. Branches snapped in unnatural ways, twisted as if shaped by hands. And yet, it wasn't until she stumbled, her foot sliding in the damp leaves at the base of a fallen cedar, that she understood something else entirely. The creature had already turned back, already reaching for her with those long, human-like fingers. Its eyes were wide with concern, not fear. It reached down and helped her up, small hand warm and sure in her palm. Miriam stared at it, at the dirt caught beneath its fingernails, at the little breath puffs coming from its nostrils, at the way its expression mirrored the worried face of a child checking on his mother. Not wild, not savage, just desperate. They pressed on. The landscape shifted, no longer familiar even to Miriam, who knew this forest better than any map. They passed what looked like the remnants of something older, rotting fence posts, tire tracks half swallowed by moss, rusted metal buried beneath years of leaves, signs of people, long gone. Miriam remembered patches of those days, the hunting parties, the men in orange vests, the ones who came into her clinic with torn arms and shrapnel in their thighs, mumbling about things they couldn't explain. She had always patched them up, never asked questions, until her son had. Just ahead, the creature slipped between two trees growing so close together they formed a natural stone arch. As Miriam stepped through, something shifted. The air thickened. The scent of the woods changed. Damp soil, yes, but now sharper, richer, like mushrooms blooming after rain. The bird song dulled. The wind, different. A hush fell. She paused. Something old stirred in her chest. Instinct. This place wasn't meant for people. But she kept walking. Then she heard it. Not a growl, not an animal's cry. It was lower, wounded, like something trying not to scream, something broken and proud. The creature had stopped, turning back, its head jerking as if to say, "Hurry!" Miriam's legs moved before her thoughts did. The bag at her side bounced with each step. The trees parted slightly up ahead. Light filtered in. What she saw was something she would never forget. A small clearing carved out between the cliffs. Ferns swept low to the earth. A thin stream shimmered across the stones, its water clear and cold. There were marks, huge footprints pressed into the mud, handprints worn smooth into boulders. A crude shelter made from branches, built into the rock. And inside, half-curled, breathing hard, was something enormous. It lay on its side, one leg twisted unnaturally. A thick, rusted metal trap clamped around its ankle, teeth embedded deep. Blood dried black around the edges. The smell of infection was faint, but rising. The baby creature ran to it, letting out a sound, high and aching. A call, a cry. Miriam stood frozen. The larger beast shifted. Its eyes opened, amber and dark, cloudy with pain. It tried to rise, but couldn't. Its breath came in shudders. When Miriam stepped closer, it growled. Low, protective. She didn't flinch. The small one moved between them, pressing its hand against the father's arm, making a sound unlike anything she'd heard. Soft, melodic, almost like a song. The growl stopped. The father's eyes didn't leave her, but he did not strike. Miriam looked down at the trap. Old iron. She hadn't seen one like it since the 70s. The kind hunters used to set for bear. Illegal now. But the forest never forgot. Around the trap, the dirt was torn. Drag marks, signs of struggle, of attempts to pull free. She knelt beside it. Her knees cracked as she hit the ground. Her hands shook. The small creature watched her, quiet, holding its breath. Miriam reached into her bag. Years ago, she'd held her son's hand through IV drips and morphine dreams, powerless to take away the pain. Today, she wouldn't be powerless. She pulled out the tools. The forest held its breath, and behind her, the sky began to turn. The trees thickened quickly as they moved away from the clearing. Miriam's boots sank into moss-covered earth, her breath tight in her chest. A sharp reminder of her age and the years since she'd last pushed her body like this. The little one, if you could still call it little, barely made a sound ahead of her. It moved fast, but not reckless. Every turn it made seemed chosen, purposeful, like following a map burned into instinct. There were no trails, no broken branches that said hunters passed here, no boot tracks, no markers. Just thickets and tangled roots and the endless hush of the forest that didn't care what you were looking for. Miriam gritted her teeth as she caught her sleeve on a jagged pine bough. She didn't stop. The bag on her back bounced with each step, the weight of it both grounding and exhausting. It was strange, how she didn't feel fear. Not the kind you'd expect from walking into a world that clearly wasn't yours. There was something else. That whisper in the ribs, a recognition. Like her body knew this walk mattered, even if her mind hadn't caught up. The forest shifted around her. Older here, thicker. The trunks weren't just wide. They were massive, towering, some with bark split from lightning scars, others with moss draped so heavily it looked like the trees wore shawls. The light dimmed the deeper they went. Not just from the density, but the way the air itself changed. It held stillness. It pressed. She ducked under a low branch, nearly tripping over a gnarled root. Her foot slid. She caught herself on her palm, the sting immediate. Before she could push herself back up, something warm wrapped around her wrist. The creature had returned. Those large black eyes full of something that wasn't quite fear. It looked down at her hand, then up at her face, its brows creased in concern. It helped her stand, slow, careful. Its fingers were surprisingly gentle. No claws, just hands, Hands like a child's, only longer, stronger. She whispered something she didn't realize until it was out. "Thank you." The creature blinked, then turned again, leading her onward. And now Miriam began to notice the signs. High on one tree trunk, scratches. Not random. Deep, vertical, too high for any bear or cat. Further ahead, a small stack of stones rested in the crook of a fallen log. Not naturally fallen. Placed, intentionally. A shape she didn't recognize but could feel meant something. She paused. On a crooked branch just ahead, 3 smaller branches had been bent, twisted into a crude formation like arrows pointing in different directions. She moved her fingers toward one of them, but the creature chirped, a short, sharp sound, and shook its head. Protective, almost. Then kept walking. She kept pace, heart ticking faster now. Not from the hike, but from the awareness that she was in a place humans weren't meant to be. A place where paths didn't follow reason, but memory. A language not spoken with mouths. As they crossed through a thicket of ferns, she spotted something to the side, half hidden under a layer of leaves and thyme. A circle of rusted nails, the remnant of a fire pit. Beyond it, leaning against a half-rotted stump, a broken piece of canvas, faded lettering barely clinging to the fabric. The last 2 letters, RD. She stared a moment longer. Years ago, there were men who camped deep like this. Hunters who came into her clinic with stories they couldn't say out loud. One of them, a man named Gordon, had a puncture wound in his thigh and swore a man-shaped thing knocked him into a ravine. She'd stitched him up, told him it was a wildcat or bear, but his eyes never looked convinced. Back then, she hadn't believed him. Not really. She did now. Ahead, the creature slowed. It turned its head slightly, waiting. When she caught up, it pushed gently at a narrow passage between 2 enormous pines. Their trunks leaned inward, and between them, a crack in the rocks formed a kind of gateway. The creature ducked through. Miriam hesitated. The moment her boots crossed the threshold, the forest changed. Not in the way people meant when talking about deeper woods. This was different. The air thickened, like something had closed in behind her. The silence turned denser. Sound moved differently, like it came from below or above, not around her. Her skin prickled. The forest didn't feel passive anymore. It felt like it was watching. She took one more step and stopped breathing for a second. The smell was different here. Gone was the faint smoke from faraway cabins, the scent of pine and dry bark. Now everything smelled wetter, earthier, like decay, but clean somehow. Rotting leaves, thick moss, something deeper than mold or mildew, the kind of scent that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Maybe more. She turned slightly to look behind her. Nothing. No trail, no footprints. The forest had sealed itself. The creature whined gently, pulling her attention back. It stood farther ahead now, perched on a slanted rock near a cluster of birch trees. Its chest moved fast. Its arms swayed. It was urging her now. She quickened her pace, ignoring the ache in her knees, the scratch on her hand, the sweat cooling under her coat. The urgency in the creature's eyes had returned. The same look it wore on her porch. Something was wrong. Then came the sound. Not loud, but deep. A low, dragging groan. Pain, but held back. A voice without words, echoing from somewhere just out of sight. Miriam's pulse jumped. The creature started to run. She followed. The land dipped suddenly, and the ground became uneven, rocks jutting up from the soil like old bones. Roots twisted across the path, snaring at her feet. She stumbled, caught herself, didn't stop, just ran. The sound came again. A moan this time, raw, wet. Something struggling not to scream. The trees parted as they crested a rise. And there it was, down in a shallow valley. Between walls of stone covered in dripping moss, she saw a clearing shrouded in a pale mist. The light had changed again, gray and dim, but not dark. The air seemed to hold itself differently here, thicker, slower. At the center of the clearing, hunched under a makeshift shelter of bent branches and fern, was a shape too big to ignore. She couldn't make sense of it at first. Then the creature at her side whimpered and darted ahead, down the slope. She followed slower, eyes wide, breath shallow. It was another one, larger, massive. Its fur was darker, coarser. One leg jutted at an unnatural angle, caught in a rusted metal trap that glinted like a buried lie. The creature's chest rose in staggered movements, like it couldn't catch its breath. Blood had dried thick around the edges of the steel. The smell hit her. Iron, infection, old pain. Her stomach turned. She stepped closer. The creature's eyes opened, huge and sunken, lined with a kind of weariness she'd only seen once before. When Eli had tried to smile at her from a hospital bed he couldn't rise from, the big one didn't roar. It didn't lunge. It didn't even move, just fixed its eyes on her, like it was trying to understand what she was. But when she stepped 1 foot closer, it growled low, a sound more warning than threat. She raised her hands, palms out. The smaller one, its child, she realized, moved between them again, placing a hand on its father's arm and letting out a strange sound, soft and melodic. The growl stopped. The father blinked. Its breathing remained hard, but it didn't attack. Miriam crouched slowly. She didn't speak. There was no point. She set the bag down beside her, fingers numb. There it was again. That same helplessness, that same guilt, that same desperate ache to do something before it was too late. She'd felt it in the fluorescent glow of a hospital hallway once, years ago, when machines beeped and wires tangled around her son's tiny body. Back then, she hadn't been able to save him. Today, she would not walk away. She unzipped the pack. Trembling hands reached for gauze, for antiseptic, for the small crowbar she never thought she'd need again. The metal trap looked old, but not dull. The teeth were real. The damage was real. This wasn't an accident of nature. Somewhere out here, a man had set this. Somewhere out here, a human had expected to catch something. And they had. But they hadn't stayed to see what they'd done. Miriam looked up. The small creature hovered close, watching her every move. The father lay still, barely. She adjusted her footing in the mud, took a deep breath, and reached for the trap. It was going to take everything she had left, and still, she knew it might not be enough. The valley opened like a wound in the earth, sudden, sunken, and silent. It sat cradled between two cliffs that rose jagged and gray against a sky thick with drifting mist. There was no trail that led here, no signpost that told you you'd arrived. It was the kind of place you only found if something else brought you, the kind of place that didn't want to be known. Miriam stepped carefully, boots sinking into the sponge-soft moss that lined the slope down. Her breath came harder now, drawn through clenched teeth. Each step pulled on muscles she hadn't used in years, but she didn't stop. Not when the little one, this child of fur and instinct, hurried ahead of her, its head jerking back every few seconds to make sure she was still coming. There was a cry just minutes ago, faint but raw, echoing through the trees like a buried sob. She'd heard pain before, animal pain, human pain, but this was different. This was pain with a heartbeat attached to it. She didn't know how, but she knew it. They reached the bottom, and the world seemed to fall even quieter. No wind moved through the trees down here. No birds. The air felt dense, the kind of stillness that settled in after something breaks. A narrow stream sliced across the clearing, water so clear she could see the ridges in the smooth stones beneath. Steam rose from it, faint but real, like the earth itself was exhaling slowly. She scanned the landscape. Then she saw the signs, large, unmistakable prints pressed into the mud. Too big, too deep to be from any bear. 5 toes, wide set. She knelt beside one and pressed her hand against it. Her fingers didn't span halfway across. The edges were sharp, recent. They weren't alone here. Not even close. Further ahead, near a rock that jutted from the hillside like the corner of a buried house, she spotted a cluster of leaves pressed down unnaturally, worn smooth at the center. A place someone, or something, had sat again and again. She took a step closer. A simple lean-to of branches and dried grass leaned against the rock wall. Crude, yes, but not careless. Built with hands. Not random like a nest. This was shelter. Then she heard it. A sound that stopped her mid-step. A short, stuttered whimper, followed by the rasp of breath drawn in too hard, too fast. The little one bolted forward, scrambling over the rocks toward the dark hollow under the lean-to. Miriam followed, heart clutched in her throat. And then she saw him. Or it, the father. A creature nearly twice the size of any man she'd ever seen lay curled on his side in the shadows, his massive form nearly blending into the dark rock and earth around him. But there was no mistaking the shape. Arms like fallen tree limbs, a chest that heaved unevenly, legs thick as fence posts. One of them twisted out to the side, caught, anchored by something metallic. Her eyes locked onto the trap. It was old. Rust clung to its jagged teeth, but the steel still bit clean into the creature's leg. Blood darkened the fur from knee to ankle. The flesh around the wound was swollen, angry, fighting to hold on. This was no accident. This was a relic. A trap from another era, left behind by hands that probably never knew what they'd caught. Or worse, did. The little one let out a keening sound and pressed close to the wounded figure, touching his arm, then his shoulder, speaking in soft, rhythmic grunts that rose and fell like lullabies. The father stirred. His eyes cracked open, glowing amber in the low light. Miriam felt something drop inside her. Not fear, not awe, just a heaviness. A recognition. This wasn't some beast. This was a father in pain. She stepped forward. The father's body tensed, jaw clenching, a sound beginning deep in his chest. A warning. He raised one massive hand, curled into a loose fist. She stopped. Hands up, no threat. Just a woman, just someone trying. The little one moved fast, planting itself between her and the father, chittering something desperate and pleading. Then it reached out, gently touching its father's chest with one hand, and extended the other toward Miriam. A bridge. The growl died. The father's eyes stayed on her, but he lowered his hand. Miriam nodded once and knelt. Her knees popped with emotion, and the pain reminded her how much time had passed since she'd last knelt beside a living body that needed saving. The trap was partially buried in the mud. Its teeth had long since dulled from rust, but they still held, still tore. The mechanism looked like one of the old spring-loaded types hunters used in the 70s, the kind designed for bears, or worse. Illegal now, but there were always those who never cared about laws when they thought no one was watching. She brushed dirt aside gently, revealing more of the trap. The steel groaned as she pressed along the hinge. It hadn't been opened in years. That meant someone set it deliberately. Someone thought this place was theirs to take from. She swallowed hard. The little one knelt beside her, mimicking her movements, small fingers tracing the edge of the wound, but never touching. Miriam glanced up at it. There was something in its expression. Focus, yes, but also fear. The kind you only see in children who've already lost too much. She pulled the small crowbar from her pack, tested the edges with her thumb, and started working the trap open. The first attempt failed. The metal barely budged. She braced with her foot, pulled harder. Her breath came sharp through her nose. The trap creaked just slightly. The father flinched. A deep rumble of pain shook through him. The sound echoed through the clearing like thunder beneath the ground. She paused. Blood beaded from the wound. Her hands shook now, not from fear, but from memory. Eli had bled once. Nosebleeds that wouldn't stop. Hemophilia. She remembered pressing towel after towel to his face, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay," even when it wasn't. She blinked hard. Not now. She adjusted the angle, pressed her back foot into the dirt, and heaved. The trap shifted. The father roared, not in rage, but agony. It rolled through the clearing like a dying storm. The little one shrieked, climbing up onto his chest, arms spread as if trying to block the pain from reaching him. Then snap. The trap sprang back, jaws wide. Miriam nearly fell backward from the release. The father jerked, gasped, then collapsed into stillness, his breath ragged, but freer. The leg bled now, slow but steady. The skin beneath the fur was torn open, gouged, bone possibly cracked. She didn't have the tools to set that kind of break, but she could clean it, could buy time. She worked quickly, pouring antiseptic across the wound, ignoring the hiss and steam as it reacted. The father groaned, his eyes fluttering, but he didn't resist. She packed gauze into the gash, wrapped the leg tight, then reinforced it with sticks split from nearby branches. It was crude, yes, but it was enough. Enough to survive. She pressed the final bandage in place and exhaled. The silence returned. She looked up. The father watched her now, more fully. His brow was heavy, eyes like deep pools of sap, ancient and glinting. He didn't bare teeth, didn't snarl, just stared. And then slowly he moved. His massive hand rose, not to threaten, but to rest lightly on the child's back. Then he shifted again, dragging himself upright with a groan that sounded like falling trees. He sat, barely, leaning into the stone wall behind him. His chest heaved. He looked at her again, longer this time. Miriam didn't speak. There was no word that would have meant anything. She just met his gaze and stayed there, holding it. A wind moved through the trees above, rustling the canopy gently. Then the father turned his head slightly, toward the lean-to, reached toward a crack in the rock, dug fingers into the crevice and pulled something out. At first, she thought it was just a stone, smooth, dark, palm-sized. But when he held it up, she saw the shape. Heart-like, not perfectly symmetrical, but unmistakably shaped by hand. Time had polished it, edges worn smooth. It shimmered slightly in the low light, catching glints of sun through the leaves. He extended it, toward her. The child looked up, then back at the father, then reached for the stone. It turned to Miriam, stepped forward, and gently pressed it into her open palm. Warm. She looked down. It wasn't just any stone. She remembered this weight. Eli had once picked a similar one from the creek bed behind their old house. Said it looked like the shape of love. She'd carried it in her coat pocket for years, until it disappeared one winter after his funeral. She thought she'd lost it. Now here it was again. Or something like it. Given not as a gift, but as a sign. A bond. Her fingers closed around it, slow. The little one touched her hand. She looked at it. It blinked once, then turned toward the tree line. Behind them, deeper in the woods, a sound stirred. A new one. Low, long, a call. The father's eyes shifted. The child's body tensed. Someone was coming, and it wasn't human. Miriam rose to her feet, eyes scanning the trees. She didn't move. Not yet, not until she knew what that sound meant. But something in her bones already did. The trap didn't loosen its grip just because she wanted it to. It held on like a memory, rusted and jagged, biting deeper every time she touched it wrong. Miriam knelt in the wet soil, her knees aching, her palms scraped raw, breath fogging in the cold air that hadn't lifted all morning. Her fingers trembled on the steel as she tried again to wedge the crowbar under the hinge. The metal barely moved. The father groaned again, a low guttural sound that vibrated up through the earth and into her chest. He didn't thrash. He didn't strike. He just clenched his fists and exhaled pain like a storm held back behind trembling branches. The little one whimpered beside him, pacing in tight, anxious circles, claws scratching softly against the stone. It didn't understand the trap, but it understood suffering. Miriam leaned back, sat on her heels, wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her breath came ragged, sharp at the edges. She'd been strong once. She remembered hauling men twice her size onto gurneys, holding down gunshot wounds while adrenaline steadied her grip. That strength had lived in her once, but now the years showed themselves in the tremble of her arms and the hollowness in her lungs. Her body wasn't built for this anymore, but that didn't matter, because the eyes of that child, those impossibly human eyes, were fixed on her like she was the only person left who could change what came next. And the father, though half unconscious and bleeding out, hadn't fought her, hadn't pushed her away. Somehow, in the quiet space between fear and instinct, he'd allowed her to stay. That was trust, or desperation, or both. She looked down at the trap again. The steel was thick, the hinge too deep for her small crowbar. Her fingers moved automatically to her bag, feeling around the supplies, hoping for something she'd forgotten she'd packed. Gauze, tape, bandage shears. Nothing with the kind of force she needed. Then her hand brushed the flat edge of a rock. She picked it up, turned it over in her palm. It was wide, dense. The kind her father used to call a god rock. The kind you prayed didn't slip when you used it as leverage. Her mind flashed back without asking. An old shed. Her father teaching her how to pry open a stubborn wooden gate. "When your hands aren't strong enough," he'd said, his voice worn and warm, "you borrow the strength of the earth. Rocks don't argue." She took a breath, slid the rock beneath the crowbar, wedging it into the soft dirt as a base, then leaned into the bar with her whole weight. Arms straining, shoulders screaming. The trap groaned. The father's leg twitched. His breath caught. Then the bar slipped. The jaws snapped halfway open and stopped. Miriam's left hand had jerked free just in time, but her right had scraped against the trap's tooth. Not deep, but enough to sting. Blood welled fast, bright against the rust. She hissed, more annoyed than hurt. The little one darted toward her, chirping high and fast, its hands fluttering at her arm, trying to pull her away. "I'm fine," she muttered, voice low, breathless. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Her strength was running out. Her hands were going numb. And the father had maybe minutes before infection, blood loss, shock, any one of them, took him beyond what her kit could fix. She sat back hard, her spine hitting the rock behind her. "I can't," she whispered. Not to the child, not to the forest, to herself. The words slipped out before she knew she believed them. "I can't do this again." And there it was, the echo behind her ribs. That same voice she heard 10 years ago, sitting in a plastic chair beside Eli's hospital bed, watching machines pump and beep and lie to her about hope. She'd told him everything would be okay, and it wasn't, and it never would be. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, tried to block the vision, but the memory didn't care. It came anyway, his small chest rising slower, his voice barely a whisper, asking if the dark would hurt. Her hands had been just as bloody then, just as helpless. The trap lay in front of her, half open, mocking. The father groaned again, and the little one sat beside her, small hand touching her sleeve. Quiet, still. Not begging now, just waiting. She looked down at it. Really looked. Its face wasn't just fur and brow ridges and wildness. It was hope. It was trust. It was the face of someone who still believed people could help. She drew in one long breath. Let it out slow. Then she moved. Back to the crowbar. Back to the rock. She reset the leverage, drove her boot into the mud for balance, and screamed. Not in fear, not in pain, but in refusal. She would not fail again. The bar moved. A crack rang out, loud and final. The jaws of the trap broke open fully, metal groaning as it gave up its grip. The father slumped instantly, breath ragged, one arm twitching from the release. Blood poured fresh, fast, but free. Miriam dropped the bar and dove for her bag. The antiseptic stung even before it hit the skin. She poured it without apology, then pressed a wad of gauze into the wound with both hands. The flesh was torn, but not beyond repair. The bone, maybe cracked, but not shattered. The swelling was bad, the bleeding worse. She worked fast, wrapped tight, splinted with branches stripped of bark, tied firm with the emergency tape from her kit. She cleaned around the fur, checked for other injuries. Every minute counted. The father didn't fight her. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at her, eyes glassy, breath slowing like the pain was starting to let go. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, hands shaking, chest heaving. And the clearing went still again. No wind, no sound. The child stepped close to its father and touched his arm, then looked up at her. There was a silence that passed between them, one not made of words, but of shared exhaustion, of something earned. The father stirred, slowly, one hand rising, uncertain, trembling. He reached out, not fast, not threatening, and let his fingers rest against her shoulder, gently, like he was trying to understand what she was made of. Her breath caught, because it wasn't a gesture of dominance. It wasn't primal. It was gratitude. His hand was enormous, calloused, weathered by wilderness. But in that moment, it felt no different than the hand of a man saying thank you in the only way he knew how. She didn't move. The contact lasted seconds, maybe less. Then he dropped his arm and leaned back, head tipping to the side, eyes half closing. Not unconscious, not yet, just letting go. The child moved closer to him, curling beside his chest. Miriam leaned back against the stone and stared up at the canopy, light breaking through in thin shards now, like the forest had shifted again. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just let the ache in her chest breathe out a little. And then a sound. Not from the father, not from the child. From the trees. Low, distant, mournful. But not sad. It was a call. One long rising tone, carried through the wind like something ancient announcing itself. The child sat up sharply. The father opened one eye. Miriam turned her head slowly. Something was coming. She didn't know what. But the forest knew. The father moved slightly, shifting his weight toward the sound. And in his eyes, for the first time, was no pain, only the calm that comes after something has been survived. She pressed a hand to her chest, felt her own heartbeat there. Still fast, but steady. Whatever came next, she had done what she could. And somehow, in the heart of a hidden valley, that was enough. For now. The light changed just slightly. Miriam didn't notice at first, not in the way most people would. But there was a softness now where sharpness had been. The way the sunlight filtered through the tree canopy, the way the breeze dared to move again. It felt like something was loosening, gently. Not the pain. That still hung in the air, thick as breath. But the fear. It had shifted, receded. She stood slowly, brushing her palms against her jeans, leaving streaks of rust-colored dirt. Her arms ached, her back stiff from crouching so long. But she didn't complain. She looked down at the father, still propped against the stone, still breathing, though every exhale was a struggle. His eyes remained on her. Dark, steady. Not a threat, not anymore. Just tired. The child sat curled at his side, silent now, fingers resting lightly on the bandaged leg as if trying to guard the wound with its own small presence. Its eyes flicked between Miriam and the trees beyond, as though listening for something that hadn't arrived yet. There was a weight to the silence between them, charged, fragile. Then the father moved. Slow, careful. One hand rose from his side, the motion deliberate. It hovered for a moment in the air, large, calloused, fingers long and blunt-tipped. Miriam watched, unsure if he meant to speak or signal or brace himself. But then the hand reached toward her and rested gently on her shoulder. She didn't move. His palm was warm, heavy, but not crushing. It was like being touched by a tree that remembered being a man. There was nothing wild in it, no desperation, just quiet acknowledgement. A thank you in a language older than words. Her breath hitched. She hadn't been touched with kindness in a long time. The moment held. Then the hand dropped. The father leaned back again, chest rising slowly. Miriam exhaled shakily and stepped back, giving him space. Not because he demanded it, but because something about the moment called for distance, a kind of reverence, like stepping away from an altar after leaving a prayer behind. The child stood and approached her now, its movements unsure, hesitant. It stopped barely an arm's length away and looked up. There was something new in its face, not fear, not even gratitude. Something deeper, a kind of recognition. Miriam held its gaze. The child turned and padded over to the rock wall. There was a narrow crevice near the base, hard to see unless you knew where to look. With surprising care, it slipped its hand inside and pulled something out. It was small, wrapped in a fold of dried leaves. It walked back toward her, cradling it. When it stopped in front of her, it extended both hands and unwrapped the offering. Miriam didn't understand what she was seeing at first. It was a stone, but not just any stone, heart-shaped, not perfect, but close. Its edges were smooth, worn by time and touch. The surface had a dull sheen, like river rock that had been held in warmth for too long. It fit perfectly in the child's palm. When the child held it out to her, she hesitated. Then she took it. And the moment she did, the weight of it startled her. Not physically, but emotionally, viscerally, because she knew this feeling. Her thumb brushed the groove along its edge, and the memory struck so fast it made her knees weak. Ellie, 9 years old, face flushed from running by the creek, grinning as he held up a stone just like this one, shouting, "Look, Mama, it's like a real heart." He'd begged her to keep it, said it was lucky. She'd kept it in her coat pocket for years, even after... She blinked hard. That stone had been lost the winter after his funeral. She thought it had slipped through a hole in her pocket during a snowstorm. She'd torn the cabin apart looking for it, crying in places she hadn't cried before. And now, here it was again. Not the same stone, but it was. Somehow, impossibly, it was. She looked down at the child. It didn't smile, just closed her fingers gently around the gift. Then, let go. The warmth from the stone didn't come from sunlight. It came from being passed, from being chosen. Miriam's hands trembled slightly. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. The child stepped aside. She looked toward the crevice where it had taken the stone and noticed, for the first time, what lay within. Dozens more, not scattered. Placed, each one shaped strangely. Rounded, worn. Some in teardrops, some in forms she couldn't name, but felt mattered. A collection, a treasury. Not souvenirs, offerings. Each one carried, held, loved. She stepped closer, knelt. Her fingers brushed another stone, smaller, smooth. It looked like a child's first carving of a face. The indent of 2 eyes, a curved mouth. Maybe it wasn't carved at all. Maybe the stone had just ended up that way. But she didn't touch it. She left it where it was. These weren't hers. She stood again. Behind her, the father made a low sound. Not a groan, not pain, something softer. And she felt it before she heard it. The air had shifted again. A new presence. She turned slowly. At first there was nothing, just the trees. Then movement. A shape stepped into the clearing. Silent, towering, and powerful in a way that made the trees seem small. The mother. Miriam knew it before she even saw her face. There was no mistaking the way the creature moved. With force, with purpose, with the full weight of something ancient stepping between worlds. Her fur was thicker than the father's. A dark russet black that shimmered as she passed through sunlight. Her chest rose with fast, deep breaths. Her head low, shoulders squared. She wasn't here for greetings. She was here for judgment. Miriam didn't move. Her heart pounded, but her feet stayed where they were. The child ran forward, chirping frantically, placing itself between the two. The mother halted. Her eyes locked onto Miriam, and it was like staring into fire that hadn't yet decided whether to warm you or burn you alive. She growled, loud, sharp, echoing against the cliffs. Then she slammed her hand into the trunk of the nearest tree. Bark split open. Wood cracked like a shotgun blast. A squirrel fled across the canopy. The valley held its breath. Miriam didn't flinch. She raised her hand, not in defense, but in recognition. Then the father moved, not much, but enough. He raised his arm and touched the mother's shoulder. She looked down at him, then followed his gesture toward the bandaged leg, toward the clean gauze, the stitched wrapping, the fresh smell of antiseptic and moss. She leaned in slightly, sniffed. The mother's posture shifted, not soft, but no longer rigid. Her arm dropped. Her eyes found Miriam again, and this time they weren't fire. They were something else. She stepped back, and for the first time, the entire family stood together. The father, still seated but upright, the child standing between them, and the mother, tall and quiet. Miriam stood across from them, heart thudding, chest tight. They looked like a family, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a stranger in the presence of one. She felt invited, not in words, not in ceremony, but in the stillness that followed. The way the leaves didn't rustle, the way the sunlight didn't shift. Something about the air said, "This is sacred now." Then, from far beyond the cliffs, a sound rose, carried across the wind. It was like a song, low, long, melancholy and beautiful. The mother responded, a matching tone that made the birds in the trees grow silent. The father joined in. Even the child hummed low in its throat. It wasn't loud, but it was layered, and Miriam understood, without needing to ask, that it was a call, a message. They were not alone. Others would hear, and know, and remember. She stepped back slowly, her hand still curled around the heart-shaped stone in her pocket. And when she looked one last time, the mother was watching her, not with suspicion, but something close to grace. Miriam didn't speak. She just nodded, and let herself disappear into the forest again, the stone warm against her skin, and the sound of the family's breath lingering behind her like the echo of something once lost, finding its way home. The wind came first, low, steady, colder than before. It slid down from the ridge like a warning. The ferns on the valley floor shifted all at once, and the child's ears twitched. Something had changed. Miriam noticed it too, not in the movement of the trees, but in the silence that followed. The kind of hush that doesn't ask for your attention. It takes it. The birds had gone quiet again. Even the stream seemed to pull its voice back into the stones. She turned slowly, already knowing there was something in the timberline. Heavy steps. The rhythm wasn't rushed, but it wasn't wandering either. Measured, intent. Then, just beyond the fog-stained branches, the forest parted. Not by wind or time or chance, but by something with the strength to make space just by walking through it. The mother arrived. She stepped into the clearing like she'd always owned it, like nothing in this valley had dared to breathe without her permission. Her fur was thick, matted with pieces of bark and earth. Shoulders broad, hips powerful, movements fluid and grounded in something ancient. Her breath came fast, nostrils flaring. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She saw her mate. And then she saw Miriam. For one long moment, the air pressed in on itself. The child froze, halfway between both worlds. Miriam didn't move. The mother's eyes locked on her, and in them was a weight that made the earth feel smaller beneath Miriam's boots. The kind of gaze that stripped away everything extra, age, reason, fear, grief, and demanded truth. Then the mother growled, not high-pitched, not wild, a low, guttural force that cracked through the clearing like thunder with teeth. Her lips curled back, not in a snarl, but in declaration. She raised her hand and slammed it against a tree with such power the bark exploded in a jagged line. Wood split, birds scattered, dust rose in a single breathless burst. The message was clear. This was not her territory. This was a test. Miriam's heart pounded like it had when she held her dying son's hand, like it had when the storm once knocked her truck off the road and into a frozen ditch. But she did not run. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she lifted her chin and did the only thing that felt true in the moment. She opened both hands, palms facing forward, empty, willing. She didn't say a word. Behind her, the father stirred. A groan escaped his chest, weak but firm. He pushed himself up with trembling arms and reached toward the mother, his hand barely lifting before falling back again. His eyes met hers, and she moved. She stepped forward, crossing the mossy ground in 3 strides. Her breath fell heavy above her mate, and then she dropped to one knee beside him. The child followed, crawling between their shoulders, pressing its body into both of them like a thread stitching the 3 together. The mother leaned in, sniffed, paused, then leaned again, this time toward the wound. Miriam watched, hands still raised, heart caught somewhere between hope and panic. The mother's face hovered just above the bandage. She sniffed again, slower. The scent of antiseptic still clung to the gauze. The clean cut of linen, the human hand in the wrap job. There was no mistaking it. She sat back, shoulders dropped. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted. Something inside her accepted what she smelled, understood the gesture, the work, the risk. She looked at Miriam again. The stare was no longer a threat. It was a study. The child made a sound, small, musical. Its fingers reached across the father's chest and tugged lightly on the mother's arm. Then it gestured toward Miriam, repeating a motion that looked almost like a beckoning or a retelling. The mother blinked, and in that quiet, something like a breath passed between them all. Not spoken, not agreed, but shared. She stood, tall again, steady. The 3 of them turned slightly, now facing Miriam not as prey, not as trespasser, but as someone who had done what most never dared, helped, and still lived. The child took a step forward, then looked back. The father nodded once. The mother didn't stop it. So the child walked toward Miriam, slow and deliberate. It reached for her hand and gently placed her palm against its chest. She stiffened, its heart beat strong, fast, wild, but steady. Beneath the thick fur, beneath the cool skin, was something unmistakably alive. The child held her hand there for a long moment, pressing in slightly. Then, let go. Miriam stood still, unable to speak, her hand trembling slightly in the air. The child turned and returned to its parents, sat down beside them. Then the mother did something unexpected. She raised her head and let out a sound, long, layered, and low. It rose and fell like a call that didn't need language, a note that vibrated through bark and stone and muscle and breath. It echoed once, twice, then silence again. She'd called out to others. She'd told them what happened here. Miriam didn't know what would follow. She didn't need to. That call wasn't for her. It was for the forest. She looked at the 3 of them, this strange, wounded family of shadow and silence. And for the first time since Eli died, she felt the ground under her feet shift in a way that felt more like belonging than surviving. The wind stirred again, warmer this time. She stepped back, the stone still warm in her coat pocket. The family remained where they were, not turning away, but not following either. And Miriam understood that her part here had come to an end. But it wasn't the end of anything. It was a beginning, of trust, of debt repaid, of balance restored. She turned toward the tree line, and the forest, impossibly, opened for her. Not wide, not with ceremony, but enough. A narrow path, a dry place to step, as if the woods themselves acknowledged what she had done, as if something old had watched and approved. She didn't look back right away, only when the air shifted again, one last time. A sound behind her, not a growl, not a warning, but a breath, a shared breath between 2 worlds. She turned her head. The mother stood tall again, arm resting on the father's shoulder. The child waved, barely. Miriam raised her fingers in return, then stepped into the trees. Her boots moved slower now, the way they did when she used to carry Eli through the snow, careful not to jostle him. Every branch she passed brushed her shoulder like a familiar hand. The sunlight filtered different now, less fractured, more whole. Behind her, she left the valley. But not the memory, not the rhythm of hearts that had, for a fleeting moment, beat in the same rhythm. The forest didn't close behind her. It didn't need to, because she would never betray the path she had walked today. Not to anyone, not even herself. The light had shifted again. Not brighter, just different. Warmer in places, cooler in others. Like the forest was exhaling after holding its breath far too long. Miriam stood at the edge of the clearing, her boots rooted in soft moss, the shape of the valley curving behind her like the inside of a memory she couldn't put down yet. The family hadn't followed. They remained where they were. Father resting, mother standing tall, the child tucked between them like a bridge between damage and survival. And though no words had been exchanged, no hand waved her off, she knew. It was time to go. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder where the bag still hung. Lighter now, its supplies spent in the act of something bigger than first aid. Her hand brushed the inside pocket of her coat. The stone was still there, cool, smooth, and pressed against her like a heartbeat she didn't want to forget. She didn't look back, not immediately. She feared that if she did, the spell might break. Or worse, her will would. So she walked forward, into the trees, alone again. But not the same. The first few steps were strange. The forest felt unfamiliar now, like it had rearranged itself behind her while she wasn't watching. The path she thought she'd taken in didn't exist. There were no broken branches from earlier, no footprints, no marks of her passage. It was as if the woods had swallowed her journey whole, digesting her time among them like something sacred and secret. She hesitated, took another step. Branches leaned overhead like cathedral beams. The ferns rustled, but there was no wind. Her breath clouded in the air, though it wasn't cold. Nothing was exactly right anymore. Nothing was wrong either. Just off. And then she heard it, a soft padding. Not behind, beside. She turned slowly. There it was, the child. It hadn't left after all. Its fur caught pieces of broken light, and its chest rose fast like it had run to catch her. It didn't speak, didn't need to. It simply reached out and touched her hand, then gestured to follow. Its eyes met hers with a kind of quiet insistence, not commanding. Just sure. Miriam let herself nod. The child turned and began walking, slower this time so she could keep up. They didn't follow a trail. There were no markers, no turns that made sense. They passed through a narrow band of trees where trunks grew in a perfect spiral. They crossed over a dry riverbed where the stones clicked together beneath their feet like they were whispering. At one point, they stepped between two stumps so identical it felt like walking through a doorway that no one had built. Minutes passed, or hours. Time thinned in that forest like breath through gauze. She couldn't say how long she'd walked when the trees began to thin. But they did, gradually, like a curtain being pulled back by invisible hands. The child stopped at the edge of a shallow rise just before the tree line broke fully. It turned to her, eyes wide. A moment passed. Then it reached up, small hand brushing against her side, fingers curling gently into her coat fabric, and placed her hand flat against its chest again, just for a moment. Then let go. It backed up one step, then another, then turned and disappeared into the forest. No rustle, no sound, just gone. Miriam blinked, heart caught in her throat. Her hand still hovered midair, fingers curled where fur had been just seconds before. She stared at the space where it vanished, willing it to come back, to give her one more moment. But nothing moved, nothing called. She was alone again. The trees ahead thinned to reveal the rise of a slope, not steep, but enough to obscure what was beyond. She climbed. One step, another. Her breath grew tighter, not from exhaustion, but from not knowing what waited. And then, the trees broke. She stopped. There it was. The cabin, exactly as she'd left it, perched among the red maples. the little chimney leaning just slightly, as always. The porch sagging at the corner where the frost had done its yearly damage. The swing still hung there, gently rocking from the breeze. Or maybe something else. Her knees buckled, not from fatigue, from the shock of familiarity. This shouldn't have been possible. The way back had been long, tangled, wild. They'd moved for what felt like hours, maybe more. But now, here it was. Home, and not from a direction she remembered. Not from any route she'd ever walked. The forest had delivered her back, not on her terms. On its. She took a step forward, then another. The porch creaked beneath her boots, just as it always had. The door stood closed but unlocked as she'd left it. A fine layer of dust lined the handle. She paused before reaching for it. Instead, she turned around. The tree stood still. No child, no shadow, no wind. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the stone. It was still warm, still heart-shaped. She closed her fingers around it and stepped inside. The cabin hadn't changed. Not in the way things change when you're gone too long. The firewood still sat in the basket near the hearth. The mug she'd left half full on the table was dry now, but unmoved. The photograph of Eli on the windowsill still stared out over the forest, faded at the corners. Untouched. She stood in the middle of the room and tried to catch her breath. She was home, but everything was different. She walked slowly to the front window and looked out. The maples danced in the wind. Sunlight splintered across the glass, and for a long while, she simply stood there, watching, listening. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just pressed her hand flat to the window pane and let the silence wrap around her like a blanket she hadn't known she needed. The stone stayed clutched in her palm. It still pulsed faintly, as if the child had left behind a piece of itself. Or maybe, just maybe, something far older had marked her. A sign that she'd been seen, that she'd mattered, that she'd crossed a threshold and not everyone got to return. She stepped back and walked to the table where she set the stone down beside Eli's box. Then she sat. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to feel tired. Not broken, not lost, just tired. Outside, the breeze shifted, and for the briefest second, she swore she heard something soft, like a low whistle, a child's exhale, or a farewell. She didn't chase it. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, in the stillness of her little cabin in the woods, Miriam didn't feel alone. The seasons didn't ask permission to pass. They just did. Years unfolded quietly at the edge of the forest, in the same way dusk always did, without ceremony, without apology. And in that soft, ever-turning rhythm, Miriam grew older. Her steps slowed, her hair thinned. Her eyes needed help to read fine print now, but her mind had never been clearer. Especially on mornings like this. The air outside the cabin smelled like damp cedar and pine sap. Spring had come and gone, and now the early touch of summer was setting in. Warmth that lingered on the windowsill. Light that stayed long after dinner. Miriam sat in her old chair, the one she'd sanded down and recushioned herself. A faded quilt folded neatly across her knees. Her hands rested gently in her lap. One of them held the stone, still heart-shaped, still smooth from 1,000 brushes of her thumb. It lived now on the windowsill by habit, but some mornings she brought it closer, like this, without thinking, just because. She no longer tried to explain the comfort it gave her. It simply was. The stone was different now, not in shape, not in weight, but in presence. It had become part of the house. Part of her. Visitors from town, if they ever stopped by, usually noticed it. Pretty rock, they'd say, and she would nod. Never more than that, because how could she explain? The things that had happened in that valley, in that forest, weren't stories meant to be retold at coffee counters or stitched into Sunday sermon. They lived somewhere else now. Not behind her, not exactly, but around her, inside her. And every now and then, she'd still walk the tree line, just to see, just in case. She hadn't seen them again. Not clearly. But once or twice, she'd caught movement out of the corner of her eye. A shadow ducking behind the trees just a little too quickly. A bend in the fern that didn't match the wind. A feeling, like she was being watched, but not with fear, with familiarity. And then there were the sounds. A low call on nights when the moon hung wide and heavy, floating above the roofline like it was trying to remember something. But never footsteps, never another knock. Until tonight. The rain had started just after dark, light at first, then steady, tapping on the porch roof like someone searching for a thought. Miriam had turned down the lamp, placed the kettle on, and pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. The stone sat where it always did now, on the Bayou Qua, the little ledge she'd built special for it just under the window. Sometimes light caught it in a way that filled the room with a softness she didn't try to name. She stood in the quiet, listening to the rhythm of the drops. And then it came. Knock, knock, knock. She didn't startle. Her heart didn't leap. She simply froze, as if her whole body had been waiting for that sound. Not for minutes, not for days, for years. She turned her head slowly toward the door. There was no rush in her steps, no panic in her breath, just a reverence. She moved to the window first, peeking through the curtain like she had that first time. But this time, there was no shadow, no figure, no fur, nothing standing on the porch. Except, she opened the door gently, let it creak like always, and stepped out barefoot. The rain had eased to a drizzle now, just enough to kiss the wood beneath her toes. And on the edge of the porch rail, resting carefully above the hearthstone ledge, was a sprig of pine. Still wet, still green, freshly broken, and below it, barely visible in the mud, 2 faint footprints, small, not human, but familiar. She didn't speak, didn't reach, didn't chase, just smiled. Because sometimes goodbye wasn't goodbye at all. Sometimes it was a reminder that the door was never fully closed. She brought the pine inside, set it beside the stone, and poured her tea. The warmth filled her chest. The silence filled the rest. A week passed. Then 2. Then one afternoon, in the middle of folding laundry, she heard a knock again, but not from outside, from inside. It was soft, curious. She turned to see the small girl from town. Sadie, she remembered, standing in the doorway with rain in her hair and a basket of biscuits in her arms. Her grandmother had sent her up the trail, she explained, with extras from Sunday baking. The girl was wide-eyed and skittish, her boots muddy, one sleeve rolled too high like she'd rushed out the door. Miriam invited her in, gently, with that quiet way she had. The girl stepped inside, looking around the cabin like it was a museum. Her eyes caught on the stone almost immediately. "What's that?" she asked, voice hushed but not shy. Miriam followed her gaze, then walked over, lifted the stone, and held it out for her. The girl turned it over in her hands. "Why's it shaped like that?" Miriam sat down, folded her hands, and let the silence stretch just long enough. "You ever feel like something found you before you even knew you needed it?" she asked. The girl nodded, slow, like she maybe didn't fully understand, but understood enough. "Sometimes," Miriam said, "things knock on your door, and it's easy to be scared of the sound. But not every knock means danger." The girl blinked. "Sometimes," she added, softer now, "a knock means there's something out there asking for kindness, and all you have to do is open the door." The girl placed the stone gently back on the ledge. "Is it magic?" Miriam tilted her head. "Maybe, or maybe it's just a reminder." "Of what?" She smiled. "That the good we do always comes back." The girl stayed a while, drank cocoa, listened to a story about a boy and a lost animal. Not the whole truth, just the shape of it, enough to plant a seed. When she left, she turned back twice on the trail, waved both times. Miriam watched her until the trees swallowed her. Later that night, the rain returned, light this time, but constant. Miriam sat by the window and thought of the valley, the way the light slanted through the trees that morning, the sound the father made when he'd first seen her. The way the child had placed her hand against its chest, like it was trying to make her feel safe instead of the other way around. She hadn't spoken those memories aloud. Not once, but somehow she felt them moving in the world now. As if the story had outgrown her. As if, somewhere deep in the forest, a call had been made and was still being answered. She reached for the stone again, held it gently, pressed her lips to it, then placed it back on the bauq. The night deepened, the trees breathed, and far beyond the porch, beyond the cabin, beyond the trail and the winding road to town, a family moved through the shadows. Quiet, tall, whole again. One of them paused, looked back, and in the hush of the rain, something in the air carried forward. An echo of steps taken long ago, of wounds mended, of kindness returned. The porch creaked gently in the breeze, and Miriam slept. There are stories we carry not because they're loud, but because they whisper something true. Stories that drift in like fog through the trees, quiet, mysterious, but honest in their weight. They remind us that kindness, even when offered in silence, has a way of echoing across time. That love, especially the kind not owed, not expected, not demanded, is the kind that lasts the longest. In a world that moves too fast, where eyes are often fixed downward and voices race to be heard, there is something sacred about stillness, about pausing long enough to listen, to a knock at the door, to the rustle of leaves, to the ache inside someone else's chest. Compassion isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in soft footsteps and leaves behind nothing but a changed heart. We often search for meaning in the extraordinary, but maybe meaning hides in the ordinary moments. A hand reaching out instead of recoiling, a door left open just wide enough, a gesture offered with no need for thanks. The world doesn't need louder people. It needs kinder ones, not perfect, just willing. And perhaps the greatest truth is this: what we give, our care, our patience, our willingness to see someone not as strange or dangerous, but as worthy, those things never vanish. They ripple, they return. Sometimes not to us, sometimes not in ways we recognize, but always, always, they matter. So if you've ever wondered whether your quiet choices mean anything, they do. If you've ever held out hope that the love you gave without asking for anything back was felt, it was. And if you've ever opened your heart to something the world told you to fear, then maybe you already know. The world is not healed by the grand. It's healed by the good. Thank you for walking this path with us, for sitting in the quiet, for believing that some stories are worth listening to all the way through. If this tale stirred something in you, if it reminded you of anything worth holding on to, we'd love to hear what it meant to you. Leave a comment below. Let us know if it reached your heart. And if stories like this speak to the quieter corners of your soul, consider subscribing. There's always more waiting in the trees, just beyond the next knock. Until then, take care of each other, and always leave the light on.